Hi, Trevor here, reflecting on life through music. Thank you for stopping by. Well, I trust you enjoyed my last video on the George Baker selection, and through this song, Paloma Blanca, which is now just one of those songs that when you hear it, you can't get it out of your head. And you wonder whether you want it there in the first place. But you know what? There's something quite amazing about that song and how successful it was. And sometimes we need a bit of a lift as a world. So I trust you found that one encouraging. Well, we are going to the absolute top, the absolute pinnacle. You can't get any higher than this guy today. He was one of the Fab Four, of course, the Beatles. Of course, in 1960, when they got together, they changed music forever. Of course, we had Lennon and McCartney as the principal songwriters. We also had Ringo Starr doing his pretty innovative drumming behind the scenes. And the other guy who often do the lead guitar parts is George Harrison. And that's the guy we're getting on to today. He was born in 1943 in Wilburys in Liverpool. He was the youngest of four children. Now, it was around that late 1950s, early 60s mark that Lennon and McCartney asked George to audition for their band, The Quarrymen. He was only 15 at the time, so there's a little bit of concern about the age, but they quickly saw how talented this guy was and how he just really just complemented their singing and their songwriting, which was starting at that point. But yes, they thought, well, let's give this guy a go, and it was around 1960 that they did their opening gig in Hamburg. Now, we all know the success of the Beatles, 600 million albums worldwide. George Harrison well and truly was a significant piece in the Beatles puzzle. They released 13 studio albums between 1963 and 1970. And we all know about those last two albums. We know about the Get Back sessions. And then we also know about the song where Abbey Road was recorded in the interesting time, but Let It Be, that was recorded before that but released after. Now, it was in that Let It Be album that we started to see that George Harrison can play more than just guitar. In fact, he do a bit of sitar and very much added expression in that way. He just was really good at just doing what the song absolutely needed. Now, I have got quite a few clips below for George Harrison, so we'll kind of go through these as we go, and the links to all of these clips in the description below. It's around 1970 from that Let It Be album. There's something about those three words, Let It Be. It was almost like they were saying, hey guys, world, let us go. We've given you more than enough material for over the last 10 years. Let us be. And one of those beautiful songs, something in the way she moves. This particular song received the unavailable award, which is pretty significant. This song was composed by George Harrison, and this song has been generally regarded as an absolute masterpiece. One of the other things I love about something is just the guitar work that's going on here. When you hear that, you think, wow, how can any guitar sound as beautiful and lyrical as that? But George Harrison well and truly did that. Now, it was eventually sung by Paul McCartney, but you know what? This is an absolutely stunning song, this one. That's the official clip on that one. You can see they're getting a little bit older here. They're around that, 30-year-old at this point. And then I thought, and then George Harrison, who I suppose had got a little bit frustrated with the fact that he wasn't getting any of his songs into the Beatles albums, and thought, hey guys, I can write something. So you know what? What more do you want? And so he thought, well, what am I going to do now? I've got a stack of songs on and record myself. And of course, you can't talk about George Harrison and not talk about My Sweet Lord. Again, beautiful guitar, lyrical solo at the beginning of this one. You know, the minute this song starts, what the song is. Off the album, All Things Must Pass. Now, I've got a great clip on this one. George Harrison was surrounded by some pretty amazing people. I think of Tom Petty on the Heartbreakers, Jeff Lynne, of course, ELO Genius, his son Dhani Harrison, Roy Orbison, Bob Dylan. There's a bit of a community of people that got around George Harrison and helped him to succeed in his solo career. So we've got a performance of My Sweet Lord for you. In 1971, George Harrison was very much into humanitarian causes. In 1971, he had the concept for Bangladesh. Bangladesh was really, really struggling at this point. Of course, when India left British rule, there were two countries that kind of also were separated. One was Pakistan, I suppose, to the left-hand side of India, and then we got Bangladesh to the right-hand side. And so those two countries, the only way India was going to become independent was for those two countries to actually be separate. This is particular concert, 40,000 people in Madison Square Garden. And this very much ushered in concerts for causes. I think we go forward to 1985 and Live Aid, very much inspired by George Harrison. Now, after 1982, there have been 10 solo studio albums for George Harrison. And it was around that 1980 when John Lennon was assassinated, and didn't the world sort of pause for shock at that, on that particular day? I mean, what had John Lennon even done? Got to George quite a bit, that particular assassination, and he kind of just, scale things back a little bit. At the end of the day, he didn't actually need to prove anything to the world. He'd been part of the Beatles, and he'd actually had 10 studio albums since that point, so he just scaled off a little bit at that point. But, it wasn't long, and then 1987, out came Cloud 9. I thought, well, I need to have a bit of a re-go here. ELO genius Jeff Lynne produced this album. You can see he's got his trademark all over this album. They're very much the big use of 12-string acoustic guitar just really brings whole magic to that song. We've got When We Was Fab. Now, this is referring back to the Beatles days, and of course they were known as the Fab Four. And George Harrison thinking, well, you can never really discount life experience. You cannot discount the Beatles, no matter how hard you try. And so this is George Harrison just going back to When We Were Fab. We got the official clip of that one. And probably the biggest hit of Cloud 9 was Got My Mind Set on You. Pretty cool song, this one. And pretty massive production from Jeff Lynne on this particular song. We've got those two official clips of that one. And then it was around 1988, George Harrison thought, I'm going to do another album, and this song, Handled With Care, came out. And the record company said, what do you mean, B-side? What do you mean single? No, there's more to this song than that. So George Harrison said, well, what am I going to do here? So he rang up his mate Jeff Lynne, and that soon morphed into Roy Orbison, Tom Petty and Bob Dylan, and the Travelling Wilburys were formed. And they were able to put a real stamp on the world, because we've got 5 absolutely master songwriters here. And they did produce that album back in George Harrison's studio, which is pretty cool. So Travelling Wilburys, Volume 1 came out in 1988, and then around 1990, Volume 3 came out. There was no Volume 2, and of course in that particular album we didn't have Roy Orbison, who died only after Volume 1 was released. So End of the Line is another one of those classic songs off the Volume 3 album. We got the official clip on that one. Here we've got just 5 guys who know what they're doing, can sing, can play guitar, can songwrite, do the whole thing. Just standing a little bit of a group and doing the Travelling Wilbury thing. That's a pretty iconic clip, that one, absolutely. And then one of my favourite songs of George Harrison's came from 1989, the soundtrack of Lethal Weapon 2. And this is the song Cheer Down, When It's All Over Now, Cheer Down. Pretty compelling lyrics, this one. Here again, we have a live version of this one. Here we see George Harrison's slide guitar work. He's an absolute master of that. And this is the thing that he is renowned for. So we've got a live version of Cheer Down. Now, I've already talked about Travelling Wilburys, Volume 3. That was where Roy Orbison was no longer with us. George Harrison left us in 2001 at the age of 58. And this is the second of the 4. Of course, John Lennon had already died. And then we had George Harrison, now dying at the age of 58, not terribly old really. I think, life had been pretty full on and heady for George Harrison, and it was only just one of the classic cases of, I think, wearing out. Now, around that 2002 mark, a concert for George happened, and there was many people involved with this. Eric Clapton, Jeff Lynne, of course, Paul McCartney, Dhani Harrison, and a few other guys. I think Prince even got a shot in there at some point, because Prince, of course, is a pretty amazing guitarist. And in one clip of While My Guitar Gently Weeps, Prince is actually taking up the lead guitar solo, which is pretty amazing. But we've got to have While My Guitar Gently Weeps from 2002, even though this was a song by the Beatles. And the who's who's of music is in this particular clip, paying tribute to what is the legend of George Harrison. We've got Jeff Lynne here. We've got Paul McCartney on piano. We've also got Eric Clapton, and we've got Dhani Harrison just sort of strumming away in the background. So this is 2002 Concert for George tribute. Now, of course, ELO genius. It was Jeff Lynne who thought, well, the ELO kind of come to a bit of a stop, but it was in 2015 that ELO played to 50,000 people in Hyde Park, and he thought, right. And so he then released an album in 2015 and one in 2019. And he also helped George Harrison with the production of one of his albums. Now, it was only going to be a matter of time before Handle with Care got into the ELO set list. And it was only going to be a matter of time because Dhani and Jeff get on with each other really well. Jeff Lynne was actually going to get Dhani Harrison to actually sing on stage with ELO. And this is a pretty amazing performance from 2019 of Dhani Harrison singing his dad's part in Handle with Care. Of course, the ELO band is just absolutely amazing, and Jeff is just really understated in the way that he just pays tribute to his mate, George Harrison here. And now he brought his son up on stage. So we've got a pretty amazing performance of Handle with Care live version. Now, what can we say about George Harrison? First of all, he didn't take any songs over. He never, ever did that. He did what the song needed, and as we discovered in Something, he just gave it space and time to be able to do what it needed to do. He was an innovator of electric guitar, of course. Don't forget when the Beatles, lead guitar wasn't so much a thing, and what George Harrison was able to do, particularly in those last 5 albums, was to innovate and really bring in a lot of creativity. He had an eloquent melodic sense, and of course very talented on the slide guitar, and his use of sitar is pretty amazing as well. A few awards. 1965 received a Member of the British Empire, MBE, with his 3 other mates from the Beatles. They'd only been going for 5 years at this point. So what can we say? It just shows to show that they were absolutely taking the world by storm. In 1978, who would have thought he would have set up a bit of a movie production company for the Monty Python gang with Life of Brian? So if it wasn't for George Harrison, Life of Brian would not have got off the ground. So pay a lot of tribute to him. 1985, he had a planet named after him, 4149 Harrison. It was pretty cool. And 1992, Billboard Century gave him a significant music award, a critical role in world music. 1988, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as one of the Beatles, and in 2004 in his own right. And he was also inducted into the Madison Square Garden Hall of Fame in that same year. Rolling Stone put him at number 11 of the top 100 guitarists of all time, and number 65 of the greatest songwriters of all time. That's pretty amazing to think that you got the caliber of Lennon and McCartney, the Beatles. This guy also been acknowledged for his songwriting. Just goes to show, when I think of George Harrison, I think of that song Cheer Down. It's just such a classic song for him to play and to write. 2009, star of the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Now, I've already talked about the fact that he contributed to a number of humanitarian causes. When you have a voice as prolific and as major as George Harrison, you can do that. So it's one thing to keep your voice to yourself. It's another thing to actually give your voice to humanitarian causes. And George Harrison well and truly has made a difference in what was a big part of the world for the Beatles. We very quickly go to Lennon and McCartney when we think of the Beatles, but you know what? If we did not have George Harrison's incredible guitar playing and Ringo's incredible drumming as well, we would have not had the Fab Four. It wasn't the Fab Two, it was the Fab Four. And it's great to know that after the Beatles finished in 1970, George Harrison went on to have a pretty amazing career as well, not only in his solo right, but also as part of the Travelling Wilburys. And for that reason, we are never going to forget George Harrison. In fact, as I'm doing this video right now, I'm just feeling a little bit that I'm talking about someone absolutely significant. Who am I in this little channel to actually talk about this iconic performer and giant in the world of music? But you know, we do need to do that one. It's not just because we're up to the Georges in this channel, but it's because George Harrison is George Harrison. He's a legend, songwriter, and let's not forget the harmonies in the Beatles. There were three-part harmonies happening at some point. George Harrison was absolutely stunning at singing backups as well. So George Harrison is George Harrison. There will never be anyone else quite like him. And how great to be able to do a tribute to him today. I think the thing we can say about George Harrison too, you know, in amongst certainly the Beatles, is that he found his niche and he found what made him work in the Beatles, and because of that, the Beatles really took flight, absolutely, with his guitar playing. So if any of the Harrison family are watching, or if Paul McCartney or Ringo Starr or any of the Lennon family are watching these videos, I did do 3 videos on the Beatles a little while back. Good to pay tribute to them. It's good to pay tribute to George in his own right today. So trust this has found you encouragement as you embark on your own musical journey, whatever journey it is you're on. So the links to all those clips are in the description below, and I've also included my last video as well. So if you want to recap on that one, feel free. Yeah, George Baker selection. So if you want to recap on him, feel free. Well, that's it for today. Next time, seeing we are getting into that Christmas season, I have been keeping a track of where I'm up to in the year. I'm going to do a couple of iconic Christmas songs. I'm going to look at The Little Drummer Boy next time with a pretty amazing hard rock version from White Heart. So until then, I'll catch you around. Bye for now.